I'm 89 years old, and I'm sitting in a small room with a window that looks out onto a parking lot, trying to understand how a person can live almost 9 decades and still end up feeling like they're waiting for someone to come home. The days are very quiet now, quiet in a way I didn't know existed when I was younger. Back then, silence was something you found only if you tried. Now it finds you, it settles in your chest, it sits beside you at the table, it follows you down the hallway. I don't tell this story because I want anyone to feel sorry for me. I'm too old for that, and I don't believe in pity anyway. It doesn't change anything. I'm telling it because I can't undo it, and maybe someone listening still has time to notice what I didn't. At my age, you start to realize that life doesn't end in one big moment. It ends in pieces. Little things disappear, and one day you look around and the room is mostly empty. I used to think loneliness was something that happened to other people. People who didn't try, people who had bad luck, people who were strange or difficult. I didn't think it could happen to someone like me. I had a job, I had a wife, I had children, I had responsibilities, I had plans, I had a calendar full of things, and still here I am. Some mornings I wake up and I forget for a second that my life is mostly over. I hear the heater click on and I think it's someone in the kitchen. I reach for the other side of the bed without thinking. There's nothing there. Then the truth arrives the way it always does, not like a punch, more like a cold cloth on your forehead. You remember who's gone, you remember what you didn't say, you remember how long it's been since someone called just to talk. The worst part is that it didn't happen suddenly. That's what I want people to understand. Loneliness doesn't always come from tragedy, it can come from habit. It can come from postponing the things that matter until they don't exist anymore. In my 30s, I was busy. That's the word I used, busy. It sounds respectable, like you're doing something important. I was working long hours. I was trying to build something. I was trying to be a man people could rely on. I thought that was the whole point. I worked at a manufacturing plant. I started out on the floor, then moved into a supervisor position. It wasn't glamorous work. The kind of place where your clothes always smelled faintly like oil and metal, but it paid the bills and I liked being needed. I liked walking into a room and having people look to me for answers. I liked being the one who stayed late, the one who didn't complain, the one who kept things moving. It made me feel solid. At home, my wife Margaret did most of the raising. That's the truth. I helped, of course. I wasn't absent. I was there, but I wasn't there in the way a person should be there. I'd come home tired, I'd eat dinner. I'd listen with half an ear while the kids talked about school. I'd nod, smile, maybe ask a question or two, then I'd say I needed to check something. Paperwork, bills, a phone call. Sometimes I'd just sit in the living room with the newspaper and pretend I was reading. The truth is I didn't know how to be present. Nobody taught me that. My father wasn't present either. He was a good man in his own way, but he believed love was shown through work, through providing. Through not being weak, he didn't hug, he didn't talk about feelings, he didn't ask how you were doing unless you were sick, so I grew up thinking silence was normal. I grew up thinking you didn't need to say much as long as you stayed, and I stayed, but staying physically isn't the same as staying with someone. In my 30s, I started waking up early, earlier than I needed to. I'd sit at the kitchen table with coffee before anyone else was up. The house would be quiet, and I told myself I liked it. I told myself I deserved it. It felt peaceful. It felt like control. I didn't realize I was practicing for the rest of my life. Margaret would come in sometimes, hair still messy from sleep, wearing that robe she had for years. She'd sit across from me and ask something simple. What time I'd be home, if I could pick up milk, if I remembered that our son had a school play, and I'd answer, but I'd already be halfway gone. I'd be thinking about the plant, the schedule, the men who called in sick, the machines that needed repair. I thought I was being responsible, but responsibility can become a hiding place if you let it. I remember one night our daughter Elaine came into the living room holding a piece of paper. It was a drawing, a crayon picture of our family, stick figures, big smiles. She held it up proudly and said, "This is you, Daddy." I glanced at it and said, "That's nice, sweetheart." Then I turned back to the television. She stood there for a second like she was waiting for something else. A longer look, a laugh, a comment. When she didn't get it, she slowly walked away. I can still see her little shoulders, how they dropped just slightly. At the time, I didn't think about it again. It was just a moment. But life is made of moments, and the ones you ignore don't disappear. They pile up quietly in the people who love you. There were other moments. Margaret asking if I wanted to take a walk after dinner, and me saying I had to get up early. My son Robert asking me to help him fix his bicycle and me telling him to ask the neighbor because I was tired. Friends inviting us over for cards and me saying I didn't feel like it. A cousin's birthday party, a neighbor's barbecue, a church picnic. I always had a reason. It wasn't that I hated people. I didn't. I just didn't want to deal with the effort of being with them. Talking, laughing, sitting around, pretending to care about small things, that's what I told myself. And over time, people stopped asking. Not in a dramatic way, not with anger, just gradually. Like when you stop knocking on a door that never opens. In my 40s, I started getting promotions, more responsibility, more respect. I was proud of that. I felt like I was becoming someone. We bought a bigger house, not huge, but bigger. We moved into a nicer neighborhood. Margaret decorated the living room with care. New curtains, better furniture. We had a dining room we barely used. That's a strange thing looking back. We had a dining room for guests we didn't invite. Sometimes Margaret would stand in the doorway of that room, hands on her hips, and say, "We should have people over." And I'd say, "For what?" I meant it as a practical question. Food costs money. People make messes. You have to clean. But I can see now that she wasn't talking about food. She was talking about life, she wanted noise in the house, she wanted laughter, she wanted connection, and I treated it like an inconvenience. Margaret didn't argue much, she wasn't that kind of woman, she had a quiet strength, she would accept things, but I could tell she was slowly shrinking inside, not in a dramatic way, just little changes. She stopped asking me to come places, she stopped telling me about her day. She started spending more time in the garden, more time at church, more time with her sister. I told myself she was fine. I told myself marriages settle into routine. That's normal. I thought routine meant stability. I didn't understand that routine without warmth becomes a kind of cold, and cold spreads. My children grew. Teenagers become adults whether you notice or not. Robert started staying out later. Elaine spent more time in her room. There were school dances and graduation rehearsals and little milestones I can't even remember clearly now. I was around, but I wasn't involved. I went to work, I came home, I ate dinner, I watched the news, I slept. I thought I was doing what men did, and maybe I was, but being a man isn't the same as being a father. When Robert left for college, I shook his hand. I told him I was proud of him. I remember he looked at me strangely, like he didn't quite believe me. Then he hugged his mother for a long time, a long time. I stood there holding his suitcase handle, feeling awkward, waiting for it to be over. I wish I had hugged him. I wish I had held him and told him I loved him, but I didn't. It wasn't how I was raised. That was my excuse. Excuses are funny things. They sound reasonable while you're using them. Later they sound like lies. Elaine married a good man. I remember her wedding day. Margaret cried. Everyone laughed. There were speeches, music. I danced with my daughter at one dance. She rested her head against my chest and whispered, "I'm going to miss you, Dad." And I said something stupid like, "You'll be fine." I didn't know how to respond to tenderness. It made me uncomfortable. I didn't understand that she wasn't asking for advice. She was offering me a moment, a real one, and I let it pass like everything else. Years went by. The kids visited less, not because they were cruel, because they were busy. They had jobs, children, lives, and I understood that because I had been the same. Margaret and I grew older together, but we didn't grow closer. That's the sad part. We grew side by side like two trees planted too far apart. We shared bills, we shared meals, we shared a bed, but we didn't share much else. Sometimes she would sit across from me at the kitchen table and just look at me, not angry, not accusing, just looking, and I would ask, "What?" And she'd say nothing. But it wasn't nothing, it was everything she couldn't say anymore. Then came the turning point, not the kind you see in movies, no dramatic confession, no sudden change of heart, just a phone call. Margaret had gone to the grocery store. She liked going alone, said it helped her clear her head. That day she didn't come home. A man from the store called. They found her in the parking lot, sitting in the car. She'd had a stroke. By the time I got to the hospital, she was unconscious. I remember the smell of disinfectant, the pale green walls, the quiet beeping machines, the nurse's shoes squeaking on the floor. Margaret looked smaller in that bed. Her face was still, her mouth slightly open like she was trying to speak but couldn't. I sat beside her and held her hand. Her skin felt cool. I kept waiting for her to squeeze my fingers, to open her eyes, to come back. She didn't. She died 2 days later. I was 67. People say that's old, but it didn't feel old then. It felt like I still had time. I felt like I was just entering the part of life where things slow down and you finally get to enjoy what you built. But she was gone. And suddenly the house was not a home anymore. It was a structure, walls, rooms, silence. After the funeral, people came by. They brought casseroles. They said kind words. They hugged me. Then they went back to their lives. That's what people do. I don't blame them. But after the last dish was washed and the last card was put away, I sat alone at the kitchen table and realized I didn't know how to live without Margaret. Not because I loved her so deeply in that moment. I did love her, I think I always did, but I didn't show it well. It was because she had been the bridge between me and everything else. She kept the relationships alive. She made the calls. She remembered birthdays. She invited people over. She sent thank you notes. Without her, there was nothing holding my world together, and I didn't have the skills to rebuild it. The loneliness came fast then, not like a storm, like water rising. I started eating meals standing up because sitting at the table felt pointless. I stopped cooking anything that took effort, soup from a can, toast, eggs. The television stayed on most of the day, not because I watched it, but because the sound made the house feel less dead. I tried to call my children more. I tried. But I didn't know how to talk to them. I'd call Robert and ask about work. He'd answer politely. I could hear his kids in the background, then he'd say he had to go. I'd call Elaine and ask how she was feeling, how the weather was, what she was making for dinner. It was all surface. I had spent their entire lives being surface, and now I wanted depth, but I didn't know how to reach it. You can't suddenly become a different man at 68, not easily. It's not that they didn't care, they did. They visited on holidays, they helped me with paperwork, they asked if I was taking my medication, but they didn't sit and talk with me the way people talk when they feel close. That kind of closeness is built slowly. It's built when children are small and you listen to their stories. It's built when you ask your wife how her day was and actually wait for the answer. It's built when you show up. I hadn't shown up, not really. So the years after Margaret died were quiet, then quieter. Friends passed away. One by one, some moved, some got sick, some simply faded. I attended funerals and shook hands and went home to an empty house. Eventually I stopped going. It was too much, too many goodbyes. I sold the house when I was 81. It was too big, too much to maintain. I moved into this assisted living place 2 years ago after I fell in the bathroom and couldn't get up. I lay there for hours, staring at the tile, thinking, so this is how it ends. A staff member found me. Now I have people around technically, nurses, other residents, a man down the hall who coughs all night, a woman who calls everyone dear because she can't remember names, but companionship isn't the same as being known. People here talk about the weather, about their aches, about what's for lunch. Sometimes we play cards, but nobody here knows who I was. Nobody here knows Margaret's laugh or the way she hummed while folding laundry. Nobody here knows my children as toddlers, their hands sticky from popsicles, and I don't know anyone else's stories either, not deeply. We're all just old people waiting, and waiting is a lonely thing. The hardest part is that I can see it now. I can see the pattern like it's laid out on a table. I didn't make one big mistake. I made 1,000 small ones. I chose work over conversation. I chose being tired over being present. I chose solitude because it was easier. I chose pride because it felt safer than vulnerability. I thought I had time. I thought I'd retire and then I'd be a better husband, a better father, a more social man. I thought I'd soften with age, but life doesn't work that way. You don't suddenly become warm at 65 if you've spent your whole life being distant. You don't suddenly have deep friendships if you've spent decades avoiding people. You don't suddenly have a close family if you've trained them quietly to live without you. That's what I did. I trained the people I love to stop needing me, and now in the last stretch of my life I'm paying for that training. Some nights I sit here and I think about my 30s. I think about that man, that younger version of me. He wasn't evil, he wasn't cruel, he was just distracted, focused, proud. He thought he was doing the right thing. If I could speak to him now, I don't think I'd yell at him. I don't think I'd call him names. I think I'd sit him down at the kitchen table and say, very quietly, "You're going to wake up one day and the house will be silent, and you won't know how it happened." Because that's the truth, it happens slowly. It happens when you don't return a call, when you skip a dinner, when you say maybe next week, when you choose comfort over connection. It happens when you let love become routine. And then one day you look around and you realize you have plenty of time, but no one left to share it with. If you're listening to this, I don't know your life, I don't know what you're dealing with. Maybe you're exhausted, maybe you're working hard, maybe you have mouths to feed and bills to pay and you're doing your best. I understand that, I really do, but I want you to notice something. Notice who you keep postponing. Notice who you keep saying you'll call later. Notice the person sitting in the same room as you while you stare at a screen. Notice the child trying to show you something small. Notice the friend who keeps reaching out. Because one day they stop, not because they hate you, because they learn you're not available, and they build a life that doesn't include you at the center, and you might not even realize it until you're old and the days stretch long and quiet and the phone doesn't ring unless it's a reminder about an appointment. I used to think being alone was a kind of freedom. Now I know it's just emptiness with a nicer name. There's a difference between solitude and loneliness. Solitude is when you choose to be alone. Loneliness is when you realize you didn't mean to end up that way. And I didn't mean to, I just kept choosing it without knowing. Sometimes I sit by the window here and watch people in the parking lot. Younger couples helping each other into cars. Grandchildren running ahead, parents calling after them. I don't feel bitterness, not really. Mostly I feel a kind of quiet grief, not just for what I lost, for what I never built. There are no grand lessons in this, no neat ending. I'm 89 now, my hands shake when I hold a cup. My memory skips sometimes. I forget names, I forget what day it is. But I remember the feeling of my daughter standing in the living room with that drawing. I remember the way she walked away. I remember Margaret standing in the doorway of the dining room, wanting a life I wouldn't let us have. I remember thinking I had time. That's the cruelest thought a person can have. Not because it's wrong in the moment, but because it teaches you to delay what can't be delayed. Love doesn't wait forever. People don't wait forever. If this meant something to you, you don't have to do anything dramatic. You don't have to make a big announcement or reinvent yourself overnight. Just notice the people around you, speak when you'd normally stay quiet, show up when it would be easier not to. That's what I wish I'd done. Because in the end, it's not the missed promotions or the long workdays that haunt you. It's the empty chair. It's the untouched second coffee cup. It's the sound of your own breathing in a room that used to hold voices. It's realizing you spent your whole life preparing for a future that arrived without the people you wanted in it. I don't have much time left now. I can feel that. My body tells me every day. My legs ache. My chest gets tight. I get tired just walking to the dining hall. I don't know how many more winters I'll see, and I don't say that to be dramatic, it's just the math of age. So I sit here and I listen to the quiet and I think about the life I lived. There were good parts, there were moments of laughter, there were birthdays and road trips and evenings on the porch, but there was also a long habit of distance. And distance, if you let it grow, becomes permanent. That's what happened to me. The loneliness I ignored in my 30s didn't go away, it waited. And then it followed me here.